Welcome to the Lobster Talks podcast by Lobster Capital, where we celebrate the bold thinkers and innovators driving change in the startup world. I'm your host, Gabriel Jarrison, and today we're shining a spotlight on Torch and its two co-founders. We have Cameron Yarbrough here with us and Keegan Walden. The two of them are here with us. Welcome, both of you guys, to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Gabriel. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Pleasure as well. I'm super excited. We just started a little bit before, which made me even more excited. So that's awesome. But now we're live. So for those who don't know you, for those who don't know Torch, could each of you introduce yourselves and introduce Torch as well, please?
Sure. Happy to go first. So I'm Cameron Yarbrough, original co-founder and CEO of Torch. I was a psychotherapist and then an executive coach for many years. I had the pleasure of working with a number of really exceptional founders like Gary Tan, Steve Huffman, Justin Kahn, and several others during my years as an executive coach. And as a part of that work with them, I got very excited about the opportunity to scale the whole concept and bring it out to the world more publicly. And really, that's what Torch is all about. It's a combination of a global pool of executive coaches, software, and behavioral science that brings professional development to everybody within the organization. So that's me, and that's Torch. Keegan.
I'm Keegan Walden, the other co-founder of Torch, and I'm a psychologist. And that's really where my interest lies. It's always been in the psychology of people and how they grow and how they change. And that was true when I was a little kid, growing up as the only child of a single parent. And then that interest just sort of grew and evolved over time and became very focused on leadership as I entered the working world and saw what it took to really succeed at a high level and what a gap there is between, for example, what you learn in college and then what you need to actually do in order to be successful in the working world. So Torch was just a great opportunity to start to bring the kind of work that Cameron and I were doing with people directly as executive coaches to the world on a much, much, much wider scale, which is what we both wanted to do. You know, you can get sort of lonely and isolated as a freestanding coach, and you can only ever work with so many people. So Torch was a way to do that at a much more significant level.
That's awesome. I'm super excited to dive in. How did you guys meet?
Yeah, so we met actually in 2007, in the summer of 2007, in a graduate training program, which we were both in at the time at the California Institute of Integral Studies. We were both studying to become psychotherapists, and we met at a Gestalt therapy summer intensive. At least that's my first memory of Cameron. It's possible we met before then, but it was right around then. And then the following year, the calendar year of 2008, we trained together at the same psychotherapy clinic, the Pier Street Counseling Center, which was a psychodynamic place. We can get into what all these weird terms mean, Gestalt, psychodynamic. They're actually all relevant to coaching. So we met there and connected and stayed in touch for years. I then went on to get a PhD, but we stayed in touch. And then years later, Torch wasn't founded until 2017, almost a decade later, we came back together to, I guess I'd say, complete the work that we started at CIIS.
Wow. A decade of knowing each other before starting. That sounds pretty good. What was the catalyst? What led you to reconnect and mostly start Torch?
I could start that. Well, so I'm going to tell you the real way that we actually met. So the real way that we actually met is when we were at CIS, Keegan loved to wear his favorite t-shirt, which was about 3 sizes too small because he had been lifting weights at the time. And he had his favorite t-shirt that said Yale across the chest in all block letters and all capitals. But Keegan's like 6'4". So when I bumped into him, I actually bumped into this giant burly barrel-chested man named Keegan Walden, who clearly had gone to Yale, and he was the only person at our school had gone to Yale. So he was very hard to miss. And he reached out his giant paw and shook my hand and said, "Cameron, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard a lot about you." That's the actual story about how we met.
Was I really wearing the Yale t-shirt?
Every day. I think you might have had 3 of them and you just wore them every day.
Well, you can see how important it was to me that everyone know that I had gone to Yale, which at that age was still like, my crowning achievement. So I think I was, broadcasting it a bit much.
But as for why we actually reconnected, aside from the fact that I crashed Keegan's wedding and was there in attendance at his wedding, though I wasn't actually invited to his wedding, but I was there. But that's a story for another time. Aside from that, I was writing an article when I was coaching at the time for TechCrunch. And I reached out to Keegan because I needed scientific validation for my hypothesis. And so I reached out to him and we were talking about the pleasure and reward system within the brain. And that was the moment that got us back together and made me realize, like, I'm going to work with this guy. I had a very kind of strong, visceral experience. I was like, I'm going to work with this guy. Like, we're friends, but like, I need to double down on this relationship.
Oh, that's awesome. And so was it first that you knew you wanted to work with him, or you guys wanted to work together, and then came the idea for Torch? Or was it one of the two of you guys who had this epiphany, like, we need to do this. Who am I going to be co-founding this with? Well, you know, my good friend Keegan, my good friend Cameron. How did it happen?
So the idea was really Cameron's. He was working as an executive coach at the time, as he mentioned, at a high level with some people who are now luminaries and were luminaries then too in the tech world. And he was just sort of watching them do great things under his care as a coach. And I think it pretty clearly occurred to him, like, hey, there's a real robust business here. You could build a SaaS business, software as a service, but really coaching as a service around coaching, using a sort of subscription model and lowering the cost so that many more people could experience it. Like, he had that insight. And I think, you know, he could speak to why he chose me as a co-founder, but I think like really the idea was his and the rest was really history. I mean, there is a wonderful business to be built here, and there's just a tremendous opportunity because as we see, and I think any of your listeners can relate to, when you come into the working world and then you've been there for 5 years or even 10 or 15, none of these jobs come with instructions. And what you actually need to do to be successful is far different from what is advertised publicly, like in a job listing or anywhere else, frankly. And coaches who've both been high-level operators themselves and have really good coach training can help guide you through that process in a way that just accelerates your career pretty tremendously.
Yeah. So Keegan and I met at CIAS, but I think that the years that really forged our relationship and our closeness and helped us get to know each other before we were co-founders was going through a T group as a part of our training. T group was created at MIT. It was popularized at Stanford. And then now it is a communications lab that's taught within many psychotherapy programs throughout the US. But I think that CIS has really perfected it. The interesting thing about going through T group in CIS is, first of all, like, CIS has this reputation more broadly as being this very woke school. Of course, maybe it is. And depending on how you interpret that term, it could be either interpreted as good or bad. For me, as somebody who, you know, identifies as straight and so on, I'm a white guy, going through that experience was incredibly valuable learning for me. Although there were times when I feel like I got absolutely crushed for being completely unconscious and not self-aware and saying really stupid things at times, that experience was profound learning that helped me be, first of all, to be a better CEO, to be a more effective founder, and to maintain a culture and a community that I think ultimately proved to be an incredibly successful culture and employee base within Silicon Valley. And were it not for that experience going through T Group with Keegan, I don't know that I would have been as prepared as I was.
Yeah, we were crushed, but in a good way. We learned what we needed to learn. Gabriel, I don't know if you've ever been in a T Group, probably not. It's not something you hear about every day, but essentially it's like, it's a group format. Think about maybe 12 people sitting in a circle. And the idea is that you get feedback on how you come off in a group in a way that you would never get it in polite company. Like, you know, people generally do not tell you what they actually are thinking. And if T Group, they tell you what they're actually thinking, that lets you explore all kinds of interesting group dynamics. You get great insight into how you are perceived, but don't think you're being perceived. And that starts to really show you what your challenges are. And in coaching, you're doing a lot of the same thing. You're helping show people what their actual challenges are, which is often different than the challenges they think they have. And so really difficult experience, but also an awesome experience. And, you know, we were able to weave a lot of that into, you know, the way we set up the company.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm not sure I want to be in a T Group. I don't know. Let's see. But
we will talk you into it later, trust me.
or you can be my T group. You can just
And at CIS, by the way, you have to do it. Like if you really want to get through it and learn about yourself, you have to do it there. Trust me, it's an awesome experience.
I'm sure it is on the other end of it. Okay, and so you start Torch, and you said 2017, I believe, Keegan, and if I'm not mistaken, you made it to YC in 2018. So what were those very first few months? And did you guys already know about YC, or did you hear about it? What's the story for getting to YC?
Keegan and I were coaching together, right? We were partners at this point. And what we realized was that if we were really going to scale what we were doing, we had to build software. If we were really going to reach the entire world, we were going to have to build a global pool of coaches. If we were really going to build something with true efficacy, we were going to have to leverage data science and measure outcomes. All of this kind of a realization and clarity pointed us to a software company. And it turns out to build software, it takes a lot of resources. And we just happened to be right there in the backyard of YC in San Francisco, literally working in the mission. So it just seemed like an obvious place for us to start. Also, I think that for us being two people with psychology backgrounds and not coming from engineering, we needed the kind of infrastructure and support that YC offered. So it seemed like a natural choice for us to apply to YC in order to get that kind of community support, the training, the structure, the guidance, et cetera. It was obvious to us.
That's awesome. Did you get in on the first try?
We did get in on the first try.
And so, of course, I want to ask you, you sort of already mentioned it, Cameron, you don't have a tech co-founder, and YC is notorious for only accepting a team with a tech co-founder. What's the secret here?
When they asked that question in the interview, what we shared was, really honest, which was that we had a lot of relationships in the Valley because of how long we had both been working in Silicon Valley as psychology professionals and as coaches, that if we get into YC, that we would certainly be able to recruit the right person. I mean, of course, we were able to deliver, and we found a phenomenal CTO shortly after getting into YC. It took some convincing, and had we not had the relationships, it might have been tough to get through that.
For sure. Cool. Okay. I want to get to the main parts of this, but we can go there in a historical, fashion in the right order. But I want to move on to the next phase, because you get to YC, then you raise a lot, you grow, and then I want to get to where you guys are now, which is, I think, probably the exciting part. But you raised in YC, and after YC, you raised over 100 million, if I'm correct.
80.
Okay, almost 100. Okay, cool. That's insane. Congrats. What's the story there? Can you, give me the best tips and advice on how to raise that much? What happened? Was it difficult? Was it easy? I'm guessing the business was booming. Give me the short version of the fundraising, because it's so impressive. Congrats.
Look, we were able to raise that capital because the business was growing really fast. And that's the first thing to know, is that raising money, as much as people have this idea that raising capital in Silicon Valley is easy because there's so many venture capitalists here, that is a false statement. It's very, very hard. And what you have to do to raise capital is grow your business. And that's honestly like why we got into YC. We got into YC because we had a lot of revenue. We had customers paying for our products and services at a very early time. We were able to raise our Series A because we were growing really fast. We had revenue, substantial revenue. And same with our Series B, same with our Series C. So in a nutshell, we raised $80 million in capital because we grew the business.
The best answer possible. I just love it so much. That's not what you expect, but that's the right answer. Okay, that's absolutely brilliant. And so fast forward 2018 to 2024, what's up now? Tell me what's going on.
Well, I'll tell you what's going on with me. So I departed Torch about 9 months ago as an FTE, as the co-founder, as a full-time employee. And that was really for a couple of reasons. I'd say like Torch is doing well. It keeps going. I think it's going to have a great outcome. But as a co-founder, your role is interesting in that like the value you add is somewhat front-loaded. And I have to admit there are two schools of thought on this. One is the co-founder should run the company from its first day until its last day, whether that's one day or 40 years later. Some people believe that. I don't think that's necessarily true. That wasn't the right fit for me. I think another way to think about it is, as a co-founder, your job is to get that initial traction that Cameron talked about. I think we had like the second or third most revenue in our entire batch at YC coming out of demo day, and to really, forge the kind of relationships and networks that are going to grow the company and move it forward in the early years. But as you progress in your evolutionary cycle as a startup, you go from seed, where the founders are doing everything, to Series A, where the founders are doing most of the things with some help from a bunch of other folks, to B, and then especially C, at which point the whole company is being run by professional executives who have done that exact role a number of times in a few different contexts and sort of know what to do, what levers to press, and how to operate the business and really scale it. Now, some founders are that person because they came up through sales, or they came up through customer success or marketing or engineering or whatever, and some are not. And so I looked at Torch in the later part of 2023 and saw that I was not really needed to continue to scale the company. We had great executives running every possible branch. And so it was a natural time for me to depart as the non-CEO co-founder. We call that the co-founder's dilemma. Like, when do you leave when you're not the CEO? If you're not a professional executive as some of the other folks on the team. So that was part of it. And the other part of it is, I did Torch for almost 7 years, and it starts to take a toll. It takes a real toll, burnout wise. That's a mental toll. It's a psychological toll. It's an emotional toll. You develop debt with your family members who have seen you, be there for those years, but not totally be there. So, there are debts to pay off to your kids if you have them, to your partner if you have one. And you're just going to continue to accrue those for that whole time, no matter how well you manage it. And I think I did a reasonably good, though not amazing or perfect job of managing it. And so come October of 2023 and in the months leading up to it, it just made sense for me to move on to my next thing after a period of rest. And so that's what we did, and it worked out great.
It's pretty awesome. Congratulations. I mean, I know there's more to this answer, but I'd like to double click on that. And I'd like to double click actually on the debt that you mentioned, because it's a topic, I believe, for every single person on earth, except maybe the 18-year-old single guy or girl, or single person, I should say. But for most people, it is a real topic. It's a topic for me, for sure, but it's also not often discussed. Maybe in your job it is, but overall, I don't think it's very often discussed. So 2 questions that I have for you regarding this debt. One, do you think there's a way to have such a healthy work-life balance as a founder to actually not have that debt, not grow that debt? And the second part of the question is, you moved on and you're doing something else. You're not retired. So what makes you think in this new position, you're not going to have that debt either? Is it because the job is different? So yeah, those are the 2 questions.
The new position is not a venture-backed startup. So I do think I can stay out of that. I think the expectations when you raise close to $100 million in financing are high, and they should be. And your investors are looking for venture scale returns. So I think there just is a level of strain that comes with the job that makes the debts that I talked about hard to avoid, although there's a lot of leeway. There's a lot of leeway in terms of how you manage it. And so one of the big growth lessons that came out of it for me was, I think there's just so much strain when you're a founder, so much on your shoulders, so much that's expected of you internally by the folks that are working for you, externally by your investors and your customers, that you've got to find a way to really work with that. And I think one thing that I learned to do is, my personality is very much, my first answer is often no. I don't think we should do that. And it's one of caution, right? And so, whereas Cameron, opposite, right? We should do this, and then we should do this, and then we should do this. And it's like a structured thing, boom, 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 boom. So he's gas, I'm brakes.
To complete each other.
Yeah, well, you need some of both, right? Like you definitely need gas. You need some brakes at least. We could debate it, but I think you probably do need both. And so because that is my natural personality, and there's a natural kind of reserve and caution there, there's also just naturally built into me a layer of resistance to everything that actually makes the burnout worse. And so come 2018, 2019, burnout's starting to set in. Certainly in 2020 when we're in the pandemic and everyone's working from home, but we're still growing the business and all that kind of thing. That set in for me. Like I had to really figure out how to work with this just natural resistance that I have, which are really just my mental elaborations and thoughts about how hard this aspect is or how hard that part is or how much I wish I had done a better job at this or that or the other thing. These are all just sort of like unmindful thoughts. And so I did a lot of, I think, successful experimenting with this resistance and started asking myself, what would it be like if my default answer was yes instead of no? And, when I first started this, it felt really unnatural. And it just felt like then I was saying yes to things and then I'd have another thing to do. But that actually was really a revelation for me, because I realized a lot of my burnout was just my resistance to the job. And if you can stop resisting the job and just go with it, yes, you'll have a meeting every hour on the hour, starting at 7 a.m. and ending at 6 p.m. And then you'll go do all the work you had to do that day. And that's just the job. That's just the job. You can fight it. You can resist it. You can complain about it in your mind. All of these mental elaborations are not helpful and are just making it harder. So once I was able to accept that and just not resist the job as much, it got a lot easier. I still did reach a point where there was a natural time for me to depart, but I wasn't working against myself as much.
And just to finish the thought on that, because that's fascinating, and you've clearly have put a lot of thought into that, which I love. That's why I'm digging, because I'm interested so much. I'm guessing your answer about your family and your debt is all about the way you perceive your work. And I'm guessing you're going to tell me that if you're feeling good about everything and you're not resisting and burnt, then your relationships with your family is just much better and you're less stressed, et cetera, et cetera. Am I correct here?
Yeah, you're correct. You have less stress to bring home to your family, because a job is what you make of it. It really is. And what you make of it has a lot to do with your childhood and how you grew up and your family of origin and how your parents treated you and how they formed an attachment with you, which is another kind of area of psychology that Cameron and I are really keen on, that we think underlies basically everything. And so, a lot of the kind of resistance that you see years later really stems from that. And so working with a good coach / a good therapist, you can start to unravel that. And then in the present moment of your life, stop resisting it as much. And then you have less stress to bring home to your family members. And then that's a relief for them. And so again, it's not a perfect fix, and you will still reach a point where it's just naturally your time, which is an article I'm writing right now, but you will lengthen your shelf life considerably.
It's crazy. I want to also ask you, so you think everybody will have a time where they need to depart, but actually, let's skip this one for the blog, because I want to hear about Cameron. You're publishing the blog post. If it's already out, we should link it into the show notes. But Cameron, you've been listening to us. Thank you so much. Anything going on with you? Please tell me more.
Yeah, I think that what maybe Keegan left out about his story is like that he touched upon this point, and for co-founders, which I think is the non-CEO co-founder has a particular dilemma that they have to solve, which is it is expected in the early stages that co-founder leads a functional unit like product or tech, and they have to be the expert on that function over time. But as the company scales and you have more resources, more recruiting ability, it gets harder and harder for that co-founder to truly be the most hireable expert within that given function over time. And then there's pressure on that person to continue to replace themselves. Okay. Well, that issue that creates that tension for the co-founder, and in many cases, it pushes the non-CEO co-founder out of the business. Okay. The different vantage point that I was coming from for myself was that I think, unlike many founding CEOs, because of my background as a coach, what I realize is that there's going to be a time when that becomes actually relevant for me as well, even as the CEO. So if I really, really do my job, there's this famous Steve Jobs quote that everybody likes to throw around, which is that A players hire A players and B players hire C players, right? The fact is that if you really are good at your job, if you are very good at your job, you are likely to hire really exceptional talent onto your executive team. And then you're going to coach them to be at their very best. Okay. The dilemma that creates for you is that it could end up coaching yourself right out of a job, right? Because if you do your job right and you hire the best people in the world and then you coach them very well, they should be suited to take over your role, right? And as a founder, forget the title for a second. Forget CEO, forget COO, forget those titles. As a founder, your job, your promise is to make your company more valuable to your investors and your shareholders and your employee base and your customers. Okay. That is your number one job. And people forget that. They think my number one job is to ensure my job, and they're wrong. So I took my own advice to heart and I brought in an SVP, this woman, Heather Conklin. I brought her in from Salesforce. I believe that she's one of the most exceptional talents in Silicon Valley, particularly in our space. She was our COO for over 2 years. She's an incredible leader. She's bought into the mission. She has the trust and the confidence of our entire employee base. She's a phenomenal operator. She'd never been a CEO before, but over the last 2 years, I coached her and supported her and enabled her to the point where she was very much ready and excited to take over the role if the right time came. And so what I saw was this opportunity. I said to myself, hey, she's ready. In fact, her skill levels, because of her background in product and her background in ops, are actually more suited to the next phase of the business. Because I have really done a tremendous amount of therapy and I'm a pretty confident person, I'm not sitting with a bunch of latent, unmitigated insecurity. I was able to see that truth and accept it and coach her into my job. And so now, at this point, I'm now executive chairman. My primary role at the company is to really continue to be a coach to Heather as our CEO. And I also am going to own our partnerships function. I'm going to own the relationship with our coaches and a number of other kind of functions that I get to kind of scope. So now my role is more narrow. It's more focused. I get a bit more time to give back to my family. But it's really actually a really exciting and kind of natural progression for my role. And I think the company's better off. I'm better off. Certainly my wife and children are better off. It's a win. It's a win for Torch. It's a win for me. And it's a win for Heather.
That's really cool. That's really, really cool. Again, 10,000 questions to ask you from that, but congrats on the move. Do you think, because that's also what we were talking about just earlier with Keegan, do you think there's a point where you would either want or feel like it's the right time for you to actually leave the business entirely and go do something else? Because obviously you're not doing that now, but because you seem so clairvoyant into all of this journey, do you think there will be a time in more years? Have you already thought about the next step, or are you taking it one at a time? I'm just curious on your mental models.
No, I'm very focused on continuing to enable Torch and support the growth of Torch. And the beauty of this executive chairman role is that I think built into it is longevity for me. And again, still, like, Torch is my life's work. I love coaching. I love coaching people and I love coaching my own employees, and I get to still do that. So at this point, the truth is, Gabriel, I have my dream job right now. And so, look, I'm going to continue to do Torch and see how all of this plays out within the market. And this is my focus for now. It's Torch.
It's interesting. So you're not able to see 5 years into the future. That's good. Otherwise, I would ask you, who wins the next sports competition and make a fortune. But now I'm thinking of, I'm sure a lot of founders listening to this are like, okay, this is interesting. Am I concerned? Should I be replacing myself as well? Should I be coaching myself out of my job? I guess for you, probably the way I heard the story, at least, is the solution sort of appeared in front of you because you had that COO who was so talented, in part thanks to your coaching. What if, I'm a CEO and I don't have someone right under my eyes that's ready to take my place, but I'm thinking of whether or not it would be the good time for me to step down. What are the mental models, again, that you use to make that kind of decision?
That's a great question, actually. And so because I'm a coach, and this is always the lens with which I view the world, is I look for talented people who have the opportunity to grow and develop, and then I try to enable them. When I hired her as our COO 2 years ago, I was looking for somebody who might have the potential to be our CEO someday. So I built this into my own thinking 2 years ago. So I think that the formula, if there is one, well, it works for me, is if you are a CEO and you are hiring that COO, that kind of right-hand person, then hire someone who could, if you decide to, if it is the right time, replace you when the time comes. And there's no harm in, if you decide not to step down, well, that's okay too. That is non-problematic. But I'm a believer in making that choice early on, finding that right person years in advance and then developing them. Now, if that doesn't work out, the person turns out a couple of years later not to be the right fit. You can still do it. You can still go out and recruit that right person to come in as a CEO. Sometimes it's a board member. I've seen other people bring a board member into the CEO role. It can be a co-executive. It can be somebody who's never been a part of the company before. But I do believe that there's certain advantages in identifying that person earlier on, whether they're on your executive team or whether they're on your board, and start to cultivate that trusted relationship years in advance. So if the time comes that you can make that move.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How did the investors take it? I mean, obviously that's not the story, but some investors or some people from the outside might be thinking sort of doing, huge shortcuts, like you guys are abandoning, leaving, whatever. Again, that's absolutely not the case. But did some investors perceive it that way? How did you make sure, they're taking the news positively?
They took the news positively. What their feedback is like, look, we've been very happy with the job that you've done in your role, but we also really, really believe in Heather and the choice that you two are making. And as long as you're committed to staying with the company and supporting her and coaching her and continue to be evolved, at least in a narrow way with the operations of the company, this is win-win for them, right? They get to see this exceptional, talented person who came from Salesforce come and take the reins. Let's see what she can do. Right. And at the same time, what I'm saying is like, I'm not leaving. I'm going to continue to help grow and cultivate success at this company. It's really win-win for them. So for them, they have been really positive about it, super supportive of the whole process.
That's awesome.
I think going to them, not in a time of crisis, going to them at a time when my standing as a CEO is still very high. I think that the risk is if you go to investors during a time of crisis and the company's maybe doing badly, or when the CEO has gotten to a point where they're underperforming or have gotten themselves in trouble somehow, like that, those are the scenarios in which it doesn't go badly. My suggestion is to any CEO is like, do it before any of that type of stuff is afoot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If there's trouble, you got to be here and fix it. And then when it's smooth sailing, potentially you could, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. I want to ask you both a question that came to mind when I was preparing for this. You guys are coaches and therapists from before, and now you're running a coaching business, that's Torch, and you went through YC, which is essentially a coaching program. So I want to ask you about YC. What do you think they're doing well as coaches, but also, what do you think they should do better? What do you think they're doing a bad job of, and how could they correct that?
So I tell you what I think they do really well. And that is essentially, so YC have seen thousands and thousands of companies come and go through their gates. They've seen companies like Airbnb come and start out and struggle at first, but then go on to be some of the most valuable companies in the world. And then they've seen companies that don't even survive the batch. Like they've wound things up before they even finish with YC, right? And then everything in between. So I think more than any other accelerator in the world or any other group of investors in the world, they understand what is likely to make your company fail. And it is an education in how to avoid those failure modes, first and foremost. That's what I took from it. And not all of those modes are obvious. It's not obvious, especially to first-time founders, how quickly things can unravel if you follow a well-worn path of what not to do. And so you learn a lot about that. But then I think that the next best thing about it for me is you have access to those folks forever forward. You can just continue to call on your group partners, other partners there who weren't your group partners, the PR team, there's a legal team that helps you with fundraising. Like it is an incredible embarrassment of riches of resources. And then that's not even to mention I think there's up to maybe 10,000 people or so who've been through YC who are all on Bookface, which is the internal community available only to their founders. And the wisdom in that group can't be captured. It's hard to put into words. Like whatever your question is, you need to find someone at company X who has a connection with, there's like 30 people who know exactly who to talk to. And within 10 minutes, you'll be on the phone with that person. Like nothing can really compare to that. And as a former founder, like I'm still really active on Bookface, really talking to founders about a variety of things. So I'd say they do an amazing job. They do an amazing job.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
I believe that the people who lead Y Combinator, Paul Graham, Nell, Gary Tan, and all the other folks like Michael Seibel, Dalton, there's countless just really brilliant minds at YC. And I think that what these folks do extremely well is they are, at their core, they are technologists. They understand technology and they understand markets. They're able to do that before other people do. Look at the fact that Gary was the first check into Coinbase. That's just a great example, right?
That's pretty crazy.
Look at where Sam Altman is now, the previous CEO to Gary. Enough said, right? These are people who really understand technology and they understand markets and where the future is headed. And they are able to recruit founders and startups who are going to fit into what they believe is going to be happening in the future. And they're absolutely the best in the world at it. And that fact is uncontested. And then they're able to support and enable those people to be successful. And the success speaks for itself. Okay. What they are not set up to do is they are not set up to help founders well enough with the thing that I think kills the most startups, which is psychological problems between co-founders. It's still the number one issue that causes startups to fail, even when they might be on a really strong trajectory. They don't have the infrastructure and the support mechanism, and there's really good reasons why. I think they're aware of the issue, but I think that they do their best to outsource to help founders solve these problems to coaches, et cetera. But I think that the sheer structure of YC is not set up to help founders deal with the relationship turmoil that unfortunately causes the greatest number of startups to fail in the early stage.
Sounds like a great idea for Torch and a partnership. Maybe. Let's see if, let's send this episode to Gary and see what he thinks. Guys.
I think that they do a great job of encouraging founders to get coaching. They do a great job of encouraging founders to get therapy. And they talk about it in the batch. It's not a secret, right? It's just it's something they have to encourage founders to watch out for and go and manage themselves. It's not something they can build curriculum for inside of YC.
I really wish we had like 5 hours of taping so we could continue this, but we're towards the end. I want to ask you both this question that I love, because then I ask you guys about a book and then I go out and read that book. And so with all my guests, I've just become a little bit smarter. So is there either a book or a quote that just had a huge impact on your life?
I have one, but I'm going to have to paraphrase it because I'm not going to get it perfectly. It's a Carl Jung quote. And Keegan, maybe you can help me fine tune it, but it goes something like this. Your unconscious mind is going to guide your life, and you will call it fate. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will guide your life and you will call it fate. Did I get that? Is that close, Keegan?
Yeah, that's the gist of it for sure.
That's pretty powerful.
And the reason why it is so important is because what Carl Jung is saying is that if you have blind spots, and every founder needs to hear this, you have blind spots. And those blind spots are going to inform your decision making, whether you like it or not. Okay. And until you do the work to get coaching or therapy or meditate or pray, do some sort of self-reflection to become more self-aware, those blind spots are going to guide decision making, whether you like it or not. And you're going to reap the consequences of those decisions. So the recommendation is do the work on yourself. It's going to make you a better founder. It's going to make your startup more successful. And it's going to make people want to be close to you.
That resonates so much with me. Super powerful. Thank you so much for that one.
For example, so rather than giving my own quote or book, I want to follow up on what he's saying, because it's a powerful idea. This idea that if you're just not aware of your blind spots, they're going to drive your whole leadership agenda and behavior. So here was a blind spot for me. I see it now. It makes sense. I didn't see it really earlier on, but I have this kind of like long and storied history with disappointment. I just know a lot about. I knew a lot as a kid about what it was like to feel disappointed, and in a bunch of different ways, in a bunch of different contexts. Like I would want things to go one way and they'd go another way. And so I grew up fearing being disappointed, but also kind of expecting it. And so if that's been like a big chord for you in your life, as a kid, starting with the time when you're a kid, then you grow up and you're in your 20s and your 30s, or even in your 40s when I co-founded Torch. That relationship with disappointment is still there, but you're not thinking about it anymore. You probably never thought about it. You just thought that's how the world worked. Again, I could call it fate that like I tend to be disappointed, but it's not. It's something I learned. And so I had to do a lot of work during the Torch years, noticing, in this interaction with this person, I'm expecting that they'll disappoint me. And because I'm expecting that, I'm contributing to the likelihood of their disappointing me in the future in subtle ways that I'm not even noticing.
That's great.
And so it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Again, if it's unconscious, I'm going to call it fate. I'm going to say, that person didn't work out. Can you believe it? Can you believe we hired this person? They didn't work out. No, that's not the case. It's really more about me understanding my own relationship with disappointment, how that can play out with different kinds of people and different kinds of situations when I'm under stress or when I'm not under stress. And then starting to like make different choices so that I'm not subtly perpetuating this view I have of the world, which is that it'll disappoint me. And again, I haven't completely unpacked that or totally solved it, but that's just one of dozens of patterns that I could call fate, as Cameron said, but which are not fate. They're my own unresolved unconscious material. And that's what destroys startups. It shows up between co-founders. It shows up within co-founders, if you will. And doing the work of really bringing that out into the light of day is probably the single most powerful thing you can do to maximize the likelihood of success.
Wow. I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's something you said it all. That working on yourself will make you a better founder. It seems what you guys said that YC talks about that specifically, like literally take a coach, go see a specialist, which I didn't know about, but makes so much sense. And again, something so fundamental that I don't think gets talked about enough, doesn't get as much credit as it should with the importance that it has. And it's honestly something I can say that I'm going through, that I've started a while ago, thankfully, but that I'm still going through. Probably you go through it your entire life. That was amazing, you guys. Thank you so much for that little gem at the very end. I loved it. Okay.
Thank you, Gabe. It was great to be here with you.
Yeah. Thank you so much both for joining us on the podcast. It's been a great pleasure having you both on the show. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in as well. Don't forget to subscribe for more conversations like this. And don't forget to rate us and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time on the Lobster Talks, stay bold, stay curious, and remember, those big ideas start somewhere.